Lauren.
Well, thanks so much, Christina, and thanks so much to all the participants and colleagues for joining today. We're really excited to be able to bring a discussion about gender data and the role of gender data in policymaking to this pre-HLPF event. And so first, I'm just going to go through very, very briefly a few housekeeping items. I feel like we all kind of know the drill with these things by now, but always a little bit helpful. So the first is that this is, of course, recorded. It's a great way for us to continue to use this conversation as a resource, but just want to make sure that you all are aware. There is closed captioning available, I believe, on your bottom, should be on your bottom menu bar. If you have any issues accessing this, please feel free to let us know in the chat and we can help. The chat is indeed open, as well as there will also be an opportunity for Q&A. You may have noticed that this is a meeting setup. It is not a webinar setup. So this is meant to be very inclusive and conversational. We'll have some opportunities for you to interact with each other, as well as kind of a less formal networking moment after the event today. So those are kind of, I think, the main housekeeping items. In terms of what we hope that you'll come away with, we're really looking to get into, I think, some of the really practical issues that arise when we think about gender data use. So what kind of techniques are out there to democratize gender data, and how can you take some messages home very practically to become a gender data champion in your office or your ministry or wherever it is you're coming from? And especially, how can you more effectively support policymakers, either through kind of the data collection, data production side, or also thinking about how to package and present and communicate gender data in ways that can really make an impact. So we've already done the housekeeping and welcome, so we're already well on our way into our agenda. So in terms of how this will go today, we have a couple very esteemed, welcoming speakers who will frame our discussion. Then we'll go to a bit of a breakout for networking, and then we'll have a panel with some speakers talking about their own experiences and reflections on their work in this area. And we'll have a bit of a very, very short closing following some Q&A, as I mentioned earlier, and also this kind of post-event networking, which is of course optional, but we really do invite you to stay and converse and connect and continue the conversation. And I think before we go to networking, I'm just going to get us started here with our opening speakers. So first, I'm very happy to hand the mic to Dima Al-Khatib, who is the Director for the UN Office for South-South Cooperation. Dima, over to you for some opening reflections.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you. And hello, everyone, colleagues, guests, and ladies and gentlemen. It's a real pleasure to be with you today to discuss such an important topic, democratization of gender data for better policymaking. 3 key ingredients for any sustainable development path: democratization, gender, and policymaking. So it is an extremely timely subject and also essential in our quest for gender equality and evidence-based governance. It is a real pleasure for me, as I said, to be with you today, and I'm really thankful to our partners, UNDP, GIZ, and Paris 21. We all know that the power of gender data lies not just in its collection, but in its effective use. And when properly utilized, gender data becomes a catalyst for transformative change. It illuminates disparities, it guides resource mobilization and allocation, and it informs policies that can dramatically improve the lives of women and girls across the global South. And undoubtedly, there are invaluable benefits of utilizing gender data, including, to name a few, to have targeted interventions, because with accurate data, we can unveil and address specific areas of gender inequality and design focused solutions. In resource optimization, gender data enables us to allocate the already limited resources more efficiently. Progress tracking, consistent, high-quality data allows us to monitor our advancement towards gender equality goals. Evidence-based advocacy. So the robust gender data provides a powerful tool for advocates to make compelling cases for policy changes. And of course, the intersectional understanding. Comprehensive gender data helps us to grasp the complex factors contributing to inequality. However, the reality is that many countries in the Global South face significant challenges in collecting, analyzing, and utilizing gender data effectively. And this is where South-South and Triangle cooperation becomes a powerful enabler. And through these collaborative approaches, we can share knowledge where countries can exchange successful methodologies for data collection and analysis. We can transfer technology by facilitating the adaptation of advanced data technologies to local contexts. We can build capacities to leverage expertise from both developed and developing nations to enhance data collection, visualization, and also enhance analytical skills. We can make advanced data systems more accessible to resource-constrained countries. We can harmonize standards by working towards consistent data standards across the Global South. We can scale innovations to help expand successful data use strategies across similar contexts. And we can learn from policy experiences by creating rich learning environments through sharing experiences in translating data into policy. I'll just exemplify this with two examples of South-South cooperation in action. Somalia, for example, has recently launched a national identification system supported by Pakistan under the ID for Africa movement. This foundational step towards gender-responsive governance will help enable the collection of accurate gender-desegregated data across various sectors and allowing for targeted interventions and more inclusive policies. The ASEAN Committee on Women has been actively working on enhancing member states' capacity in gender data production, establishing reliable regional databases, and ensuring public access to high-quality disaggregated data. We at UNOSSC, we remain committed to facilitating these efforts. And today's event is part of the Data to Policy Network initiative, jointly established with UNDP and with GIZ. And this network, with over 90 policymakers from 26 countries, focuses on leveraging data for impactful policy implementation, with gender as one of the key areas highlighted. This is also a call to increase the number of the policymakers to join that network. We will continue to share our good practices through our digital platform, the South-South Galaxy, expanding into thematic areas, including the gender and data. We also invite you to join Galaxy. It is a vital resource for disseminating knowledge and innovative approaches in data-informed policymaking. Let me also underscore that the true value of gender data lies in its use and application. Data sitting unused in databases cannot drive change. Our goal must be to create an ecosystem where gender data is not only collected and shared, but actively used to inform the decision-making at all levels. The challenges we face are significant. Many countries struggle with limited analytical capacities, inadequate data infrastructure, and difficulties in translating data into policy. South-South cooperation and Triangle cooperation are surely effective mechanisms to overcome these obstacles. I therefore call upon you all to join us in this crucial endeavor, and through our collective efforts, we can ensure that gender data becomes a powerful force for equality and sustainable development. By democratizing not just the collection, but the use of gender data, we can pave the way for more inclusive, equitable, and effective policymaking. So let's work together to build a culture of data-driven decision-making across the Global South. And I look forward to a fruitful discussion today. Thank you very much. And over to you, Lauren.
Well, thank you so much, Dima. And again, thank you to the Office of South-South Cooperation for your reflections and your work in this critical area. I'm very pleased now to hand over to Krista Jones-Baptista, the Executive Director of Data2X, to also offer a bit of framing for our discussion today. Krista, over to you.
Thank you so much, Lauren, for the warm introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm so pleased and privileged to be here today to help open our discussion on democratizing gender data for better policymaking. And I want to start by thanking Paris 21, the UN Office for South-South Cooperation, and the German Agency for International Cooperation for organizing this important event. Data2X, as many of you know, works to find innovative solutions, helping to close gender data gaps from production to influencing greater use and policy impact. And we achieve this through partnerships with many of you, network building, technical assistance to countries, and advocacy. And we do this work because we believe gender data is crucial for advancing gender equality and empowering women and girls and gender diverse people globally. And while there's been progress in advancing gender data, with many thanks to those around the virtual table here and the funders that support this work consistently, the reality is significant gaps remain that require our continued focus and partnership, as Dima was saying. And in most basic terms, many countries still lack comprehensive, high-quality data on critical issues, such as women's economic participation and time use, health, education, violence against women on and offline. And this data gap is a barrier to understanding and addressing the unique challenges women and girls face and moving towards inclusive data use for policy across silos. And it's even more important to fill this gap with the current pace of technological advances such as artificial intelligence. We know that gaps exist beyond technical specific data collection gaps. And I'll highlight 3 areas that we're here to discuss today: communicating, connecting, and capacity strengthening. When it comes to communicating, once data is collected, we must also focus on how to present, package, and share data. To be used for policy, data needs to meet the needs of policymakers and be understandable to the public. And while official government data is essential, we've also seen that civil society organizations can play an important role in connecting with citizen-generated data, as they understand the local context and can help translate complex data stories that drive action. Earlier this year, we launched a research report on data cooperatives. This research assisted women's organizations in establishing data cooperatives where they could decide how and when to share their data. Initiatives like this explored new models for data sovereignty and how data can be communicated, and they're crucial for the next wave in granting women and girls greater control over and access to their data, empowering them and helping close the gender data gap. When it comes to connecting, one of the main reasons gender data isn't reaching policymakers is due to silos that exist between different stakeholders. Government officials, statisticians, journalists, academics, and civil society come with different data sets and sometimes different perspectives. And these silos prevent the flow of data and insights that are needed to inform policy decisions. Bridging these gaps is really essential for making gender data more accessible and actionable. I'll share an example from our work. We've partnered in Kenya with Honorable Harriet Chigai, Women's Rights Advisor to the President, and we're working with her to connect government officials, statisticians, and media. In October 23, for example, Kenya launched its first ever time use survey, measuring women's unpaid and paid work, led by the National Treasury and Economic Planning Ministry. Once this data was collected, it also needed to be shared and used. So to mark the International Day of Care and Support, Honorable Chagai's office coordinated a press briefing with key ministries, Senate leaders, and media to highlight the importance of care work using insights from the survey. This is an example of ways that government, policymakers, and civil society and media can be connected to democratize data and create a path for the use of that data for policies. When it comes to capacity strengthening, that's such a critical area. And South-South cooperation, as one of the things we're talking about today, is so essential. In order to improve the production and use of gender data, we must invest in capacity strengthening of national statistical systems and among stakeholders. This means providing funding, training, resources, and support that ensure data collection and analysis are robust, aligned with global standards, and created and collected in ways that can be used for policy. An example of this work is the Gender Data Network that Data2X leads in partnership with UN offices, Paris 21, and Open Data Watch, working with national statistical offices. This demand-driven initiative serves members in 44 countries with a set of programs such as knowledge hubs, face-to-face and virtual collaborations, and best practices dissemination across geographies in Africa and Asia. These examples and the others that we'll hear about today underscore the importance of connecting, communicating, and strengthening capacity to break down gender data silos and increase the uptake of gender data and policymaking. I look forward to listening and learning from many of you today. It's really only by working together that we can create a world where gender data is not just collected, but used across silos to drive meaningful change for women and girls and people of all genders. Thank you, and back to you, Lauren.
Thanks so much, Krista, and thanks to Data2X for their work to champion these issues globally. So we are going to move straight into our next element of our agenda, which is actually handing the mic over to all of you briefly and getting a chance to share and exchange. So just to get us warmed up a little bit and an opportunity to connect, we're asking you, why do you think policymakers might have a difficult time accessing and using gender data and insights? So you will be put into breakout rooms, small breakout rooms where you can exchange briefly on this topic. It will be very, very brief. So please introduce yourselves quickly and enjoy the discussion.
Hi, everyone. If you are just joining, we are moving to some breakout rooms to connect with one another. And we have a prompt question for you all. Why do you think policymakers have a difficult time accessing and using gender data insights? So you'll be placed in a breakout room shortly. But if you're having any issues, please just write in the chat. I checked this off for me, and we're happy to get you to the right place.
Nobody is there in the room number 15. 15.
Okay,
Nope.
we will sort that out now. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, my connectivity went wrong, so I got kicked out.
Hi, Nori. Considering it's only 1 minute away from the end of the activity, so
Oh.
let's maybe stay at the
Okay.
which room you were in?
Oh, it was just two people in there, and we got to introduce ourselves, so timing was okay.
Okay, let's then leave the conversation going with those two people.
Sure.
Hi, everyone. If you're just joining, we're in the middle of a networking activity, which should be over in about 30 seconds. So sit tight and we'll be back soon.
Right, everyone, welcome back. Hopefully you've all found your way back to the event, the main room here. And I hope you're able to make a few connections, hear from different people, where they're coming from, what's motivated them. I know I was in a session with someone who is doing research, someone who is physically at HLPF right now. So really exciting to have quite a lot of different people here with us for this conversation. And I think it's really indicative of just how exciting the topic of gender data is, really. So we're going to move to our panel, which is a small panel, but mighty. We're going to have a bit of a conversation today. So I'm just making sure that we have everybody here. And I will introduce our panelists. So first, we have Fatima Triaza, who is the head of Population and Social Statistics Division at the Maldives Bureau of Statistics. Riaza is a statistician. She is, of course, the head of this division. She's been working in the field of demography, poverty, gender statistics, and has authored various national publications. She's part of various expert groups at the international level and represents Asia and Pacific at the Washington Group on Disability Statistics. Her contribution to changing population dynamics and population aging in the Maldives is invaluable. Very, very warm welcome, Riaza. And then we have Rhonda Zelenzi Green, the founder and CEO of Datocracy. Rhonda is the founder of Datocracy and Panoply Digital, a social organization that uses its expertise in technology, education, and gender to solve sustainable development problems. She is an advisor to the Digital Impact Alliance Council, or DIAL, at the United Nations Foundation. For the past 20 years, Rhonda has been a driver of digital change, creating social learning systems to empower global populations considered historically marginalized. Very warm welcome, Rhonda. So to get us started, I actually am going to bring us back to our breakout question. And I wanted to ask, what do you think, Rhonda and Raza, policymakers have a difficult time accessing and using gender data? Maybe we go to Rhonda first.
Sure. So I would say that one of the biggest things that I've observed as a trainer and my first career as a teacher is that the field of data is extremely jargonized. So most policymakers or civil servants, they do not come from a background where they know about data, or most of them do not. And so when you look at a lot of the curricula that are available to train civil servants in this area, it is very much filled with jargon and an approach that assumes a certain level of understanding that quite often is simply not there. So from this perspective, I think one of the things that I love doing with Datocracy is kind of lowering that barrier to entry and taking the jargon out. As an academic myself, even though I have a PhD, I'm at pains to always speak in more simple language, and you just fail to see that in a lot of the fora that these discussions are held. And then I would say the second thing that kind of serves as a barrier to this is the lack of gender data. So the absence of data that is disaggregated by sex is a problem that many people, including my mentor, Dr. Nancy Hafkin, have been screaming about for decades. And we are still struggling to get that, even with things like the recent COVID-19 pandemic, where the impact on women is quite different from men, but there's not been enough interest, even from governments, to see how those differences in sex actually affect their population. So I think those two things, so like getting rid of the jargon, making things very simple, and then simply collecting gender data will be a great help to policymakers and other civil servants.
Thanks so much, Rhonda. I think it's a great point. I mean, oftentimes I think, have a tendency to think that this whole process of promoting data use is quite complex, and we forget to simplify. And indeed, to get to use, you of course have to have something to use, and gender data gaps are still absolutely a challenge. And maybe we can get into a bit more of that in the discussion. So I'm going to go to Tina now with your thoughts based on your experiences in the Maldives, perhaps on why it might be difficult for policymakers to use gender data.
Thank you, Lauren, and thank you, Lauren, and thank you for this opportunity. Let me start by reflecting on what was discussed within the group. There were few of us, but it was highlighted that one of the main challenges and the issues that policymakers face in accessing gender data starts from the point of collection. In some countries, especially with regard to administrative data and for field operation, it's not collected in a very accessible manner. And the policymakers actually like doing a very basic analysis based on the data coming from the field. So that was highlighted. Reflecting on what's happening in Maldives, one thing we noticed is the policymakers that we have at the moment, not everyone is aware of the importance of gender data as well. So sensitizing is something we really need to carry out for the policymakers in terms of what gender data is actually presenting. The situation that it is presenting within the country, when we look at women in power, when we look at gender-based violence and employment in the country as well. That's talking about the policymakers in terms of looking at the data that we have in the country. One of the things that we have noticed is not all the data presented by the different line ministries is very user friendly for the policymakers, for them to access and make use of this data. So we also have a lot of data on our website where it is but you can only do that, and for some of them it's really difficult to navigate through the website and get to the right and most appropriate data which they are looking for. So that is there, and we also have to acknowledge that the policy makers also lack the necessary skills and capacities and the key knowledge on where the data is available in the country. We have good administrative data system in the country, so it's a matter of knowing where it is made available and how this information, which is already being collected on a routine basis, can be made for promoting gender concerns within the country as well. So thank you.
Thanks so much. No, I appreciate both of your responses because I think they also map very, very nicely to our 3 C's we have for our session of connecting, communicating, and capacity. They all showed up there, this issue around simplifying and jargon, this awareness and sensitization that you were bringing up, Raza, the user friendliness aspect, but also thinking about, making those connections, with data that already exists. Sometimes the data is there and people just don't know where it is. Sometimes the data isn't there. So yeah, we can get into, I think, a few more of these topics. And so with that, I'm just going to go straight into, we have, I think, a few questions for each of you to discuss. And I'm going to go back to you first, Riaza, really on this point of connecting, which I think you started to get to, of really thinking about how do you get to policymakers. And I'm wondering if you could reflect a bit on your experiences and maybe what the challenges are, but also what maybe some solutions might be to bridge silos between government officials, statisticians like yourself, journalists, academia, civil society, these different stakeholders that might have a role to play in gender data use.
Thank you, Lauren, for the question. And I think but I would like to start by saying that that's one of the challenging areas for us as well. How do we bridge this gap that we have with the media, with the academia that we have in the country? Coming from a small statistical office, I believe one of the challenges that we have is the hesitancy that we even have within the NSO to face the media. There is the fear among us that whatever we produce might have a certain kind of backlash coming from the media, and we might have to go through so many processes to answer that as well. So let me start by saying that it's important that we have continuous dialogue with the policymakers, continuous dissemination activities with the journalists in the country, and involve academia more in the process of what we are doing, what different agencies are doing in the country with regard to data collection. And it's not about involving them at the end of the process. It's important that we hear from them at the beginning, at the initial stage of the process, involve them in the consultation processes that we are carrying out, not about the whole collection process, but on how best we can disseminate the data that we have collected as well. So having this kind of partnership with the media, with the academia has in fact started to work well for us recently. And let me also give an example of what happened with us. We have actually started disseminating infographics on special occasions in the country. And one of the figures that we published with regard to the NEET population was actually misinterpreted by the media, by the journalist. So we have to again kind of bring out certain information with regard to what we have published. So it's again reflecting back on the point of continuous engagement, helping the journalists to understand the statistics that we are publishing and working with them to bring a better story out of it as well. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I think that's a really important point. One, that it's continuous, it's not a one-time moment, and also that it's not necessarily something you do just around dissemination, but that this is kind of like a relationship building process, which, I know a lot of statistics offices kind of have the stakeholder dialogues after something's already been produced and the report's already ready and it's beautiful. But yeah, I think that's a really important example. And as you said, even when you prepare these things, sometimes they're picked up and misinterpreted and so on. And so it's really quite a lot of effort. But I think it's definitely an important strategy for sure to make those connections. Maybe I'll go ahead and go to Rhonda with our next question. Which really is, I think, thinking a bit about your experience more on the training and capacity development side. How do we strengthen the capacity of policymakers to collect, produce, and analyze high quality gender data from your perspective?
Thank you, Lauren. That's a great question. As a background to everyone on the call, since about 2015, I have been training policymakers and governments around the world, probably now more than 100 governments, and most recently working as a consultant for the International Standards Organization, doing some trainings with national standards bureaus in about 45 countries. And I want to call attention to the comment that Cedric Tiobo has made in the chat, where he talked about the lack of a connection between gender data and monitoring, evaluation, and learning. These things go quite hand in hand. So to offer a practical example, in the work that I do for the International Standards Organization, I help them to develop gender action plans that focus on how they can improve gender metrics both within their organization and in their national standards making work. And the point that they always fall down on is actually monitoring, evaluation, and learning. So most of the times they have absolutely no idea what this means, how it's conducted, and more importantly, how this relates to gender data. And so in the workshops that we conduct with them, and so far I've conducted workshops in Asia, Central Europe, and then also in Latin America and the Caribbean. And with these workshops, what we do is help the governments kind of understand, all right, if you're going to create a gender action plan, one of the things you need to be able to understand if you're moving the needle is the gender data. So we start with very basic training around monitoring, evaluation, and learning, which includes those items related to the collection, the management, storage, the entire data life cycle as it relates to gender data. And then from there, we mentor them for about 6 months after we have that workshop to help make sure they have the tools and the resources necessary to actually do this. So I would say, you have to first build that understanding with them. And again, as I started off with earlier today, make that as simple as possible. But then you don't just lead people to their devices. One of the things that has been a pain point for me as a trainer is that very often, courses will be developed or trainings will be held, but then there's no follow-up after that when the real world begins and people actually need to implement it. So I would say having that kind of ongoing support, and I think Cedric, you also, or someone that was Dumitru mentioned also having government to government exchanges about these things. And that's also what we're doing now. So I can co-sign all of that and say, from the countries that we first started out with working on gender data and monitoring, evaluation, and learning, after a year or two, the skill level has just gone up, and they are learning from each other, because as I said, it's now more than 45 countries participating in this. So I think that is one thing. I think another thing is also considering and building understanding about the data that these governments already possess. So governments are some of the biggest holders of public data, but quite often this data itself is not disaggregated by gender. And so I think there's also a need to build capacity around, like, all right, you don't have to start from scratch because you probably already have some of this information to hand. So how do you work with your data in a way to make sense of it? And so Nana from the government of Ghana mentioned earlier that they're going to be starting with gender budgeting. And so to be able to do that, you have to know, the sex split that you have with the data that's available to you. So I think, from a training perspective, there's still such an incredible dearth of opportunities like this that are very practical and accessible from the perspective of a busy civil servant. And so for me, like, one of the things that I want to see more of is not just events like this, but then also opportunities like the one that I helped co-create, which was a Gender Data 101 course, which kind of broke down the basics of what gender data is. And then we also created a case study with our partner DataBit that helped us to give government stakeholders more advanced skills in this space as well. So starting simply, and then eventually upskilling even more advanced data skills.
Thanks so much, Rhonda. Yeah, there's so much there. I think one of the things that's really striking to me, and that's been striking to me in our work at Paris 21 as well, is actually the capacity demands for gender data use are pretty high. Really, you're asking people to be able to use data. You're asking them to understand the process or like feed it into a particular process to kind of be sensitized to gender issues. It's quite a compound capacity problem. And I think you're absolutely right. Kind of these we've got to move beyond maybe some one-off moments, and instead think about this as a bit more of a journey. And that means building more learning communities. It means, thinking about how to kind of build skills progressively. So, I mean, skill building is definitely a factor. We know it is. Capacity strengthening is. But it's there's quite a lot of layers to it, and I really just appreciate the way you've unpacked some of that, I think, in your own work, and hope it continues. We are moving through the time very rapidly. Time flies when you're talking about gender data. So I'm actually going to just go ahead and open the floor, because of course, I can ask more questions, but I also know that many of you may have questions to ask. So I invite you to please raise your hands. We will actually let you open your mics and ask a question to our panel if you would, if you'd like to participate in the discussion. And I am unafraid of awkward silence, so I will wait.
Oh, so that's a great question. And from Yasmin, who asked if we have any advice on intersectional data collection. I will say, as a scholar of intersectionality, I think people need to actually start with understanding what that means, because we have a lot of words that have been picked up as buzzwords, and people will write about it and proclaim to be doing it, but are not actually doing what that theme is. And I would say that intersectionality is one of those words. So I would encourage everyone, as a starting point for that, read the work of Kimberly Crenshaw, which is a Black American legal scholar who coined intersectionality and defined it and kind of, gave it meaning. And then from there, you can start to learn about how that applies to data collection. But Fatima, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, that's a great question. In fact, and we are facing challenges in that as well. For a statistical agency, we do have various data collected. We do have data coming from administrative sources. The question here, which needs to be addressed, is what is the type of intersectionality that we are interested in looking? What needs to be prioritized as well? So that's where we really need to tap into the minds of the policymakers, work closely with them to identify the urgencies, the urgent needs which they have, and try to address this intersectionality in present in the data. I'm talking about the dissemination part here, and this is something which was actually highlighted in one of in the gender use study which we did in the country. We need to present more of our data based on the cross intersectionality and based on the data that is available in the country as well. So that's it. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's learning what it is. It's collecting data differently. It's also presenting. And I think, as you were saying, Riaza, it's also about how you present the information. Oftentimes there's actually more depth there with data that we have than is actually analyzed and presented. So yes, but definitely a lot of learning still to happen here. We have another question in the chat. How should we start collecting gender data in our own organizations? Rhonda, Riaza, thoughts on this?
Sure, and I'll connect this to the question that was asked just before that from Cameron Kaufman. What have been some positive developments or big wins recently in bridging gender data gaps? And I would say that the work that I've been doing with ISO has kind of been twofold. So this work has been largely inspired and influenced by Dr. Caroline Criado Perez. She's a very famous researcher who has been leading the charge on the importance of gender data and how it can literally kill women when things are not right. And I would say that from the perspective of national standards making, the people that I've been working with in training had never thought about gender in their work. And 2 years out, 3 years out, these people who are making standards for men and women in their country are making standards that are now gender responsive. So before they're creating standards, they're thinking about how this standard might affect men differently to women. And then they're actually using data that they're collecting in their work. And this, standards making covers so many sectors, but they're relying on data more and more, and where it's available, gender disaggregated data, to inform their work. So the awareness, number one, of the need for gender responsive standards is one of the big wins. And then number two, actually seeing the data from this to then turn into actual standards nationally and internationally has been one of the greatest and most exciting things in my career. So just seeing people go from theory to practical action, that's having a direct impact on people's lives.
Thanks so much, Rhonda. That's from
Yeah, no. I just would like to echo what Rhonda said, and just would like to add one thing. Before you start doing any type of data collection, I think it's important to look at what are the best practices that are made available, and that's kind of reflecting on Rhonda has said, and what has worked well for other countries as well. But what has worked for other countries might not work well for you as well. So that's where the cultural norms and the gender setting in the country comes into it. And you might have to take a different approach when you are thinking of collecting data within your organization. And my advice would be not to start big, but to start with something small, gradually gain the importance of it, acknowledgement from the others, and try to create a momentum where the impact of the data that you have collected is enough for the policymakers or enough for the seniors to make a change based on it as well.
Fantastic. No, I'm very reluctant to close the discussion. I feel like I could chat with you two for an hour probably, but there is a very, very active chat, and possibly the most active chat I've ever seen in a webinar. So well done, all of you. Please continue. And we will actually have a little bit of a networking moment, as I mentioned earlier, to kind of continue some of these discussions and the conversations. We encourage you to stick around. For now, I do have 2 more speakers just to offer a bit of their closing reflection, but a huge thank you to both Riaza and Rhonda for the offering up their knowledge and their experience. Yes, we will of course continue the discussion in the networking. Yeah, so as we kind of move toward closing the more formal part of the program for today, we do have 2 speakers with us. We have Carolyn Erdman, the head of data and AI for policymaking at GIZ, as well as Gayan Pires, who is the head of data and technology at the UNDP Chief Digital Office. Thank you both very, very much for joining us. And I'm going to start by just asking you both, kind of reflecting a bit on the conversation and the moments that we've had today, maybe things that came up in the chat, things that came up in the panel. What stands out to you? Maybe I'll start with Carolyn.
Hi, Lauren. Hi to everyone else here in this event. Thanks so much for having me. So my first reflection is actually on what Krista and Dima said, like in the beginning, that data should go like beyond the technical availability and be accessible as well as like relevant to the decision makers that we work with. So data has to meet our partners where they are in the entire like decision-making process or circle. And I think this is also something that Rhonda and Fatima, I think, also mentioned, and is also something that confirms on what we experience in our work, implementing data projects on the ground with our partners together, especially in the Global South, is that we have to consider the entire like data circle from like collection, analyzing into what needs to be put into action. And I think it was Fatima who mentioned it, that the data collection is a crucial part here, because most of the time this is the starting point of entering this data circle and putting it into action in the end, and that we need to focus a lot on where we get the data from and what kind of data they are, and that we include data from all the groups that are relevant for decision making, right? So this is something that resonates with me, and I think all my colleagues in working on the ground on data a lot. And there is something else. I think it was Rhonda who mentioned like something around capacities. And this is also something that we face like as a huge challenge at GIZ, that we need to support the people that are collecting, analyzing those data, and also the policymakers that will put it into action. And from our experience in the past, it was more like us in the projects kind of forcing like a component on like training and all of these capacity development into our projects. But I would say there's a positive shift to it in recent times, because I feel like the governments, the policy makers that work with us together are more actively coming towards us and asking for this, right? So I would say this is a positive shift. Governments themselves having a demand and voicing this demand towards us, asking for more capacities in order to work with data and putting those data into action, political actions in the end.
Thanks so much, Carolyn. I loved hearing about a positive shift. We love positive stories and positive trends. Gayan, over to you. What stands out to you in the conversation today?
Thank you, Carolyn. Honestly, I didn't want the panel to end. It was so fascinating for me to hear the discussion, and building on what Carolyn said. And also panelists talked about, especially Fatima talked about knowing what's available. I think it's also important to understand or also know what is not available as well. Acknowledge that there is a gap that exists. And UN Women saw like 26% increase in gender data from 2016 to 2022. But the reality is that we are far off the track. the reality is we are not measuring what matters and also not making decisions based on data. Also, Rhonda emphasized the need for disaggregated data as well. And we need disaggregated data on subgroups like ethnic and religious minorities, SMEs owned by women, maybe low-income groups, young people. Without this data, we are overlooking the complexity of social stratification. So it is important that there is a majority of people who are not connected. It is important to acknowledge this. And also, out of that majority, out of that 2.7 billion people that are not connected, majority are women. They are also like, they are 4 times less likely to have advanced ICT skills than men. Now, we cannot address these problems if we don't have the data. And also going back to what Fatima said, it is fascinating as well on how journalists and media saw the analysis that you came up with. And it is important. It is not just the government or the NSO making these decisions. It is everyone is involved in this journey, not at the end, not just publishing the data or publishing your findings. In the true sense of democratizing data and democratizing this information, make them part of the journey, make them involved from the beginning so everyone owns the decisions that you make. Back to you, Lauren.
Thanks so much, Gayan. I think that really encapsulates a number of the points that really stand out to me as well. I'm going to make a very difficult demand of you both and ask if you just reflect very quickly on where do you see gender data innovation heading today in 30 seconds or less. So just give me a couple key ones, and maybe that'll get people kind of thinking a little bit for the networking as well. Carolyn.
All right, that's difficult now. Pitching emerging technologies or like innovations in data. I think one thing that everybody talks about, like a little buzzwordy, is like artificial intelligence, AI, that is kind of have a crucial role in like revolutionizing like data collection and its usage. So for example, we at GIZ, we also try to incorporate AI, work on and with AI in our use cases. For example, in like Mexico, we used with the Ministry of Women together AI and natural language processing in order to find the optimal like locations for care infrastructure. And I think this can be like replicated to other like sectors or other regions as well. And we have the demand, we experience the demand each and every day of other partner countries from the global south asking us how to deploy AI in addressing like other crucial issues like health or, for example, climate change or something like that. So I feel like we need to intensify our effort to keep the pace with the emerging technologies in order to use it in the right way, because of course AI has a bright side, but I feel like we also need to talk about like reinforcing biases with AI, as AI is like mainly trained on like historical data that are excluding marginalized groups such as women, for example. So we really need to make sure that AI is used for what it actually stands for, helping us to work more like efficiently, to be more target oriented, to be more fair and more inclusive, in order not to like replicate the negative effects of excluding data and excluding therewith marginalized groups such as like women and girls.
Thanks
I
so
hope
much.
this was quick enough.
No, it's great. And I think, indeed, I think AI is certainly one of those things, I will say, as a gender data practitioner, that's very much on my mind. And this kind of two sides of the coin, the opportunity, but also the risks. And so really, really delighted that GIZ is taking on this challenge, and we'll be excited to learn more. Gayan, very quickly, thoughts on gender data innovation,
Yes,
where headed?
If you ask any development practitioner these days, where the landscape is shifting, obviously AI is the topic of conversation, and to add to that, the availability of non-conventional data as well. And if you couple them together, I think that has a massive potential to sometimes fill the data gap and also uncovering disparities and trends as well. So UNDP, for instance, we developed recently a gender social media monitoring tool, which was deployed in several countries, combating gender hate speech online. So there are tools like that we can utilize. But really quickly, because these areas are relatively new, the only way to move forward is to learn from each other, because no one has all the answers, basically. So which is why we have these forums, which is why we have the networking opportunities. So let's learn from each other on what is available.
Well, I can think of no better note to end on than that. So thank you very, very much, Gayan. And thank you to all of our panelists, all of our participants. It's really just been a little bit of a whirlwind, but such a rich discussion. Very much appreciated. And I'm going to hand it over to Christina for final word and guidance on the networking. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, speakers. Thank you, our event co-hosts. Thank you to all participants for staying on a few minutes later. I do want to just reinforce the call that both Caro and Gayan made. We do have the Data Policy Network. If you're interested in this session and joining future sessions, please sign up. I believe my colleague Raphael put the link in the chat, but if you're have your smartphone, you can also just take a picture of the QR code. And yeah, thank you again for joining. We have a post-session survey that we would love to hear your feedback on. And we'll also be staying on just a little bit longer if you have any questions about the Data Policy Network. If you want to share your own experiences and compare with other colleagues, just stay on the line and we'll probably change or move everyone to breakout groups in the next 5 minutes. Thanks everyone for joining, and thank you, speakers.